He grabbed the royal guard's arm and instantly regretted it. The crowd gasped. A thunderous command rang out, and in the next second, John went flying back into the dirt. But the most humiliating part was still to come. Now, let's start from the beginning. The Tower of London loomed over the crowd of tourists like a silent witness to centuries of history. Its massive gray walls, weathered by time, cast dark streaks of shadows across the cobblestone streets, where an endless stream of people walked, snapped photos, and chattered in dozens of languages. The air carried a mix of street food aromas, damp stone, and the lingering moisture from a recent downpour. At the center of attention stood the Royal Guard. A tall, fair-skinned young man, around 25, stood motionless like a statue. His perfectly pressed red uniform had not a single crease. His towering bearskin hat made him even more imposing, and his white gloves seemed like a natural part of his unshakable presence. His face was expressionless, his gaze locked onto a distant point. Even as one tourist after another ran up for photos, cracked jokes, or tried shouting in his ear, the guard remained completely unresponsive. But today, there was one person in the crowd who decided to challenge that unshakable composure. John. A tall, fair-skinned American, around 45, stood near the front, studying the guard with a smug smirk. He wore a bright orange jacket, ripped jeans, and an air of absolute confidence, as if the world revolved around him. His movements were broad and careless, like someone used to being the center of attention. Are they even human? They're like robots, he scoffed, nudging his friend Mark with his shoulder. Mark, a shorter, stockier man, looked visibly uncomfortable. He cast a nervous glance at the guard, then at the surrounding crowd. No one seemed inclined to intervene. "This guy doesn't even flinch," John continued, watching the soldier's unyielding expression with growing curiosity. "Bet you I can make him react." Mark frowned. "John, don't," he muttered, but his voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. John's smirk widened. His eyes gleamed with mischief, the kind you see in people who love pushing boundaries. The crowd was starting to take notice. Those nearby subtly stepped aside, a few pulled out their phones, sensing something worth capturing was about to happen. And then, John stepped forward. Now, he was right in front of the guard, just inches away. He leaned in deliberately, peering into the soldier's face, trying to catch even the slightest reaction. But there was none. The guard remained stone still, his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the distance. John clicked his tongue. "Come on, man. Do you even blink?" he drawled, dragging out his words. No response. The silence between them grew tense. The crowd murmured. Someone giggled. A few glanced uneasily at the security officers nearby. But it wasn't enough. John snorted, and before anyone could stop him, he suddenly grabbed the guard's arm. For a second, the world froze. Someone in the crowd gasped sharply. A woman holding a camera covered her mouth with her hand. A few people stopped breathing altogether, and then everything exploded. The moment John's fingers wrapped around the guard's arm, the air seemed to thicken. The crowd stood still, the atmosphere charged with tension. Some fell completely silent, others held their breath. This was the moment everything changed. The guard reacted instantly. Like a coiled spring snapping into action, his thunderous voice erupted through the square. "Stand back!" The words boomed like a sudden clap of thunder in a cloudless sky. The crowd jolted as one. Tourists stumbled backward, some instinctively raising their hands, others yelping in shock. With precise military precision, the guard's rifle snapped upward, not in a threatening way, but firmly, authoritatively, unmistakably. John froze. He had not expected such a swift and forceful reaction. For a fraction of a second, his eyes flickered with fear. And then, it was gone. Pride, arrogance, and the refusal to accept defeat took over. His smirk returned, but now forced. His ego wouldn't let him back down. He scoffed, shaking his head, and curled his lips into a mocking grin. "Oh, look at you. So tough," he sneered, his voice slurred slightly with misplaced confidence. "You think people are scared of you?" But there was one thing John didn't understand. Royal Guards do not tolerate physical contact. Without hesitation, with a single fluid motion, the guard yanked his arm free from John's grasp. It wasn't personal. It was protocol, discipline, instinct. In the same swift movement, his shoulder slammed into John's chest, not as an attack, but a firm, undeniable shove, a clear, unspoken boundary being enforced. And that was all it took. John's balance wavered. His feet slipped on the wet cobblestones. He flailed, trying desperately to steady himself. Too late. Thud. Splash. Mud. The crowd gasped. A spray of dirty water shot into the air, soaking John's bright orange jacket, splattering his already wet jeans, dripping from his hair. And then, the laughter began. At first, just one chuckle, then another, and then an eruption of laughter, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Phones flashed, cameras rolled, people cheered. "Oh my God, did you see that?" Someone cackled. "That was epic! Who got that on video?" A woman squealed. "Dude, you're gonna be a meme!" Another voice called out. John sat there, stunned. His breathing ragged, his face drenched, his clothes ruined. But the worst part wasn't the fall. The worst part was the humiliation. He felt the eyes on him, mocking, laughing, looking down on him, enjoying the spectacle. His face flushed red, his jaw clenched, his knuckles turned white. How could he lose? How dare that guard do this to him? His lips curled into a furious snarl, his fists trembling with rage. "You damn robot! Who do you think you are?" he barked, scrambling to his feet, the mud-streaked fabric clinging to him pathetically. But he had no idea. The worst was yet to come. John struggled to his feet, his jacket soaked through, his jeans streaked with dirt. Water dripped from his face, mixing with sweat and sheer humiliation. He could feel the crowd's eyes burning into him, their laughter ringing in his ears like a cruel twist of fate. His chest rose and fell heavily with rage, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was shaking, not from the cold, but from fury. The crowd wasn't just laughing, they were mocking him. Some were recording, others pointing, and many were simply enjoying the spectacle. You damn stone statue!" he shouted, spitting the words at the guard, who stood motionless, just as before. Not a single muscle on the soldier's face twitched. His gaze remained fixed forward, as if the furious tourist in front of him was nothing more than empty space. That only made it worse. The crowd continued to murmur, but now their voices carried something new, anticipation. They knew John wouldn't back down, which meant this was only going to get better. Then, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" The crowd instantly fell silent. People began to step aside, forming a pathway. A British officer was approaching. A man in his 50s, lean and disciplined, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to burn right through a person. His dark blue uniform was immaculate, his steps measured and precise, his posture exuding authority. The entire atmosphere shifted, as if the air itself had grown heavier. He stopped directly in front of John, fixing him with a look that held zero patience. "That guy grabbed the guard," someone from the crowd called out. John whirled around, his chest still heaving with frustration. "He pushed me first," he roared, jabbing a finger toward the guard, who remained as still as ever, like a statue carved from stone. The officer didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly shifted his cold gaze from John to the guard, then back to John, before delivering the words that would change everything. "You touched a royal guard. That's a violation of the law." The crowd gasped. A wave of tension rippled through the air. Suddenly, everyone understood. This wasn't just a clueless tourist causing a scene. This was an offense. John froze. For a brief moment, his rage flickered into confusion. "You're joking," he muttered, letting out a nervous scoff. But the officer wasn't joking. His face remained stern, unyielding. "You will be detained." That was it. That was the moment John snapped. "What?" he exploded, his face turning bright red, veins bulging at his neck, his breathing ragged and furious. "Are you kidding me? I'm a tourist. You can't be serious with these stupid rules." The crowd erupted in whispers, but now it wasn't just chatter. It was excitement. They could feel it. The scene was building toward its final act. Phones flashed, screens recorded, social media posts were already being written as John pounded his fist against his chest, desperate to assert control. But the officer didn't budge. Not 1 inch. John lunged forward, trying to prove his dominance. But he didn't even make it a single step. 2 police officers, who had silently moved in from both sides, seized him. Iron grip. No hesitation, no warning. "Hey! Hey!" he howled, thrashing, but it was useless. The hold was too strong, the officers too experienced to let him slip away. The crowd lost it. "Oh my God!" someone shouted, camera rolling. "Dude, you just dug your own grave!" What a plot twist! And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice rang out. Calm, ironic, full of amusement. "Wow, this is just epic." John kept struggling, shouting curses, threatening everyone in sight. But it didn't matter anymore. He had lost. Completely. Utterly. Irrevocably. John was being dragged forward, his arms locked in the officer's grip, his boots slipping against the wet cobblestones. His clothes clung to his body, soaked and filthy, making him look pitiful. A man who had just lost the dumbest fight of his life. The crowd followed, buzzing, gossiping, laughing. Some were streaming live, others were snapping photos, and everywhere, he could hear cameras clicking. He could hear voices narrating his downfall, but he could do nothing, except walk and endure it. "Dude, this is the dumbest arrest I've ever seen. Man, great American tourist thought he could do anything." John would have laughed too, if those words weren't about him. But now they felt like a sentence. His rage boiled in his chest, his throat tightened, his hands trembled, but he couldn't let it out. He knew. He had just become a walking meme, and the worst part? He knew it. But one person wasn't laughing. The guard. He still stood there, unmoved, unfazed, untouched. Not a single twitch of satisfaction. Not a smirk, not a glance, not even the slightest reaction. He hadn't just humiliated John. He had erased him. And that was the most infuriating part. John seethed, his face burning, his body trembling, but he could do nothing. Then, a sharp, cold voice cut through the chaos. "You are being fined for disorderly conduct." The officer stated it flatly, like it was just another report. John sucked in a breath, his fists clenching so tight they trembled. He stood frozen, trying to process the words, and then jerked forward, only for the officers to tighten their grip. "A fine?" he spat, voice cracking with rage. "Are you serious? I'm a tourist. I just—" "Now smile!" someone from the crowd yelled, and in that exact second, a camera flash illuminated his furious, dripping face. The crowd erupted into laughter. John bit his lip, his breathing ragged, his eyes blazing, but he knew. It was over. He was now the star of hundreds of viral videos spreading across social media, and they all told the same story. A cocky American thought he could do whatever he wanted, and got exactly what he deserved. This was the worst humiliation of his life, and the crowd savored every second, justice had been served.